Hello and welcome back to Underlab. Well, here's something a bit different. This video isn't intended to criticise Undertale, rather it's to point out the things that have little to no explanation. In the past, I've speculated over these details and suggested how they could tie into broader theories. However, one possibility I've never dismissed is that there's flat out some parts of the game that just don't make sense, and were probably an oversight by Toby. This video will go over some of the most glaring plot holes that somewhat break the game. I'll try my best to provide a rational explanation for them, but some defy all logic. As much as I'm looking at flaws here, remember that nothing is perfect, and I personally feel that none of these things actually make the game worse. They're just funny to point out and talk about. So let's find out Undertale's greatest plot holes. So, to begin with, the very first plot hole we encounter happens in the very introduction of the game. Unbelievably, there's an inexplicable error this early on within the story, which really does raise some eyebrows. We're told that the monsters were sealed underground with a magic spell, and we clearly see some sort of wizard or mage holding a scepter as he seals away the monsters. This is all well and good by itself, but later on within Snowdin's misspelt library, we're told that humans can't express themselves via magic. It's essentially explained throughout the game that while monsters get to use magic, humans get determination. So, which one is it? How were the humans able to use magic in the past, but they suddenly can't now? I've tried many times to explain this one, and while I do have a few possible answers, there doesn't seem to be anything official. Perhaps some monsters assisted the humans, or perhaps for some reason humans have since lost the ability to use magic. I explained that something like the legendary artifact may help humans to channel spells. Whatever the case, it's pretty hard to confirm any of this in-game. Now, what's equally possible, or potentially even more likely, is that it's just an oversight that Toby made. Within the game's files is an icon called Spell, which infers that the character we play was once going to be able to cast magic. However, this feature was clearly removed. With that, perhaps the story got a little messed up. Toby probably included the facts that humans can't use magic later on when fleshing out the lore of the game, completely forgetting the references he had already described of them casting spells. This probably ties into how our own ability to use magic was cut at some point, as there seems to have been a major alteration to the story that Toby didn't quite fully apply to the rest of the game. The next thing that really doesn't make sense is probably the entirety of Flowey's character, who is hypocritical and nonsensical. What I mean is the fact that he apparently can't feel empathy. However, Flowey is clearly capable of logic and reason and pretty much everything else. He begs for mercy on the genocide path and even shows a moment of contemplation if he's spared on the neutral route. It seems all too convenient then that the only trait he lacks is the same thing that would completely redeem him. It doesn't really make sense how he's able to recognize the monsters from his past and even make judgments on them if he doesn't also have a shred of empathy left. Surely just by thinking, he could come to terms with why he has no reason to do half the things he does. Unfortunately, Flowey seems to be a character more motivated by the plot than his own personality. In other words, he's little more than a plot device. As an actual character, he just doesn't make sense. Sure, in the world of Undertale, losing your soul means losing your empathy, but that should also mean you're pretty much incapable of thinking or intentionally turned evil. Neither of these seem true of Flowey, as he's clearly still capable of acting on his own volition, as his kill or be killed philosophy is one he made up entirely by himself. Another character who doesn't make much sense at all is Sans. When we first meet Sans, we learn that he's a comedian and a prankster. However, as the game goes on, we also learn that he's extremely lazy. At first, these just seem like random character traits designed to make him a little more interesting. However, on the genocide path, we learn that there's a reason for it. The truth is he's seen into the future, and that's his haphazard excuse for being lazy. He saw a world of nothingness where everything was gone, which is undoubtedly accurate on the genocide path. Moments later, after defeating Sans, we go on to destroy the timeline with Chara, which has to be what he was referring to. So where's the plot hole? Well, consider this. Sans is lazy on any and all paths we choose to take, even the completely innocent pacifist route. On these, nothing terrible happens, and the timeline remains intact. So in other words, Sans really has no reason to be so lazy on anything but the genocide path, but even in the midst of sparing Undyne, we see him asleep on the job, proving that his laziness transcends all boundaries. So what's his excuse on the pacifist path? The only possibility is that Sans really is just a lazybones, and that the comment he makes on the genocide path is either meaningless or just a plot hole. The next oddity is the clothes we find throughout the game. How do they all fit Frisk? Well, actually this part is perfectly explainable. They come from the fallen humans, who are also most likely children. That's all very well by itself. We know what happened to them. One way or another they died, and their souls were brought to Asgore in his prolonged effort to break the barrier. Nothing seems out of place, or does it? Well, there is one thing. How did all their belongings end up in the places where they presumably died? died. Now this isn't necessarily a plot hole, but the implication is extremely creepy, and surely unintended. As we know, human bodies don't disappear after death like monsters do, so the only possibility is that they were stripped down before being taken and buried within New Home. That means they were left completely naked for no apparent reason, as that certainly isn't a requirement for extracting their souls. So you tell me what that's all about. Another gaping plot hole comes in the form of the True Labs amalgamates. Remember, these creatures are supposedly the fusions of several monsters. Now the explanation we're given is that monsters can't hold determination as they lack physical matter. This has to be the strangest and most nonsensical answer ever. There's plenty of monsters in the game who are far bigger than Frisk, and we're being told that they don't have enough physical matter to hold determination. This just flat out doesn't make any sense at all. Did Alphys only inject very small monsters? Well no, we know that isn't true, as there's monsters in there like Sharon's agent and Snowdrake's mother. So what did Alphys mean by this? The only answer I've come up with in the past is that monsters are mostly magical rather than physical, but that by itself really does explain very little. After all, just what exactly is magic if it can constitute an entire monster? Yet another detail of the plot that just doesn't really make sense. One of the strangest plot holes within the game comes about near the end, and it's been the source of one or two theories for me. Just before we reach New Home, Alphys rushes ahead to inform us that our human soul isn't enough to get through the barrier. She seems very upset when she confesses that the only way we're getting through is if we kill Asgore and take his soul. We go ahead and the king himself tells us the same thing, to take his soul and to pass through the barrier. While this is all very sad and touching, Flowey comes along and destroys Asgore's soul before any of these things can happen. Then we defeat Omega Flowey and the game ends. Do you see where the problem is here? At no stage did we require Asgore's soul to actually get through the barrier. We just managed it somehow. Therefore, the information Alphys and Asgore gave us is invalid. This has led to speculation that Frisk didn't escape the underground on the neutral route at all, and may have actually died in their attempt to go home. Still, there's no implication that this happened, and it's heavily inferred that we did escape, so it seems more like a plot hole than anything else. Speaking of the barrier itself is one giant plot hole. Why is there a specific location where the monsters are sealed in? Frisk entered the underground from the opposite end of the area. That must mean there's at least one way into the underground. Are you really trying to say that the monsters have been sealed away for centuries, but they never once tried to simply climb out where there's an obvious exit? Even if this part of the underground is also somehow sealed, why can't they just tunnel their way out and make their own exit? The only possible explanation for this one is that the barrier is likely a sphere encompassing the entire underground. But that still doesn't account for why there's one specific place known as the barrier. It seems the monster's entire plight is based around the fact that they didn't stop to spend 5 seconds and actually think about things. So that's it for Undertale's plot holes. I guess you could also add in the small detail that the entire game takes place in a giant hole. That was quite the surprising amount of plot holes. Some of them are minor details, while others are quite game-breaking, such as the details involving the barrier and Asgore's soul. As I mentioned at the beginning though, I personally don't feel that any of these things particularly ruin the game at all. Still, it's probably best if you don't think about them too much. It is pretty funny to think that so many of the major details of Undertale's story could easily be avoided or subverted if only the monsters had just thought things out a little more. Were any of the plot holes I talked about new to you, and which one did you find the most amusing? Be sure to let me know in the comments. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't fall down a hole of any kind, and I'll see you next time. Before I go, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to my patrons. My head scientists Asgore and She, Cameron Vigil, Kay Jensen, Sophronius, Mary Morkan, Oodly Noodly, Emily Gatewood, and Zelda Butterfay. And my Underlab scientists Crystal Sleet, Nicholas Dux, Armin Arlett, Marisa Ray, Corey Kidwell, Yushio Koroni, Sarah Wydra, Commander JNM, and Amphrax MLG. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out the Patreon link below, as well as the video that explains why I'd so massively appreciate your contribution.